we are already in July, it is of course time to talk about the good, the bad, all of the books that I read in the first half of 2025. Hello friends, it has been a minute. I apologize. Life just lifed a little too hard, so I haven't really been in the best place for filming, but I am back today to talk about all of my reading so far this year. I'm very excited to discuss all of the things. I'll start out by doing a little bit of an overview. We'll talk some stats. Earlier on in this year, I crafted like my ideal Notion database for books, reading, tracking, all of that fun stuff. And then I'm going to talk about every book that I've read this year. And then to finish things off is the little awards section, or I guess the TLDR if you can't be bothered with any of the rest of it. I'll be talking about my highlights and then a low light. Specifically, I'll be sharing my favorite sci-fi book, my favorite fantasy, my favorite romance, and my favorite reread, and then what my least favorite read was. So, shall we get started? Hello and welcome to my Notion library. While I get started, I just wanted to say a huge shout out to these lovely folks, Kate's Bookshelf, Plant-Based Bride, and Eli Wimmer. I drew a lot of inspiration from all of their databases and kind of mishmashed them to make it my own. So just wanted to give credit where credit is due. But we're going to dive into the statistics, why don't we? So, looking first at genre, I have read mostly science fiction and romance this year, which I think is definitely a change from the usual. Sci-fi, not super surprised about, but romance, she's creeping up. Typically, like a majority of the books that I read are fantasy. It's been knocked into third place. How interesting. Besides this, I've also read some memoir, historical fiction, and poetry. Looking at the age groups, it's been a majority adult, smidge of young adult, and then the ratings. I've had a pretty good reading year. I think my average rating for everything so far is around 4 stars. So for the most part, it's been pretty damn good, which I'm happy with. Majority of books I've read have been physically. I've also read a good chunk on my e-reader, and then just one audiobook so far. And then just for a very brief snapshot of what I've kind of read each month. January, I finished no books, but as you can see, I did read over 600 pages. February was 6 books. The number there against February is actually entirely wrong. Upon closer examination, I just forgot to calculate half of the books. The number of pages I read was actually 1,480. March and May finished 3 books, April 5, and then June just the 1. Overall, I've read 18 books this year. 4 of them were rereads, which is fantastic because one of my goals for 2025 was to reread more. One of my other goals was to really prioritize sequels, but alas, I've only read 3 sequels. And I also put together a list of 25-ish books that I wanted to read in 2025. And of that, I've completed 2 books. I completed 1 trilogy. I've started another book, and I've added officially 1 book. I mentioned it as an honorary mention in that video because I wasn't sure what the publication date would be. It hadn't been announced. It has now been officially announced, and that is The Strength of the Few, which is the sequel to The Will of the Many, which was one of my favorite books that I read in 2024. So it's officially on the list. I will be reading it at some point this year because I need to know what happens next. So, shall we dive into the books? To kick off the year, I reread The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, which is one of my favorite books of all time. I have read this several times throughout the years, but it has been a little while since I last reread it. So I thought it was about time that I did so. And I don't know why I thought this, but for some reason I assumed that I wouldn't react as emotionally as I might have done in the past because I'm so familiar with the story. I've read it so many times. I know what's going to happen. Why would I sob about it yet again? I was sorely mistaken. I think I was in tears for the last 75 pages of this book, struggling to read because I could barely see. Oh, God. So safe to say, this book definitely still hits. It is such a good one. So The Book Thief is a historical fiction novel that is set in Germany during World War II. But in particular, we follow a young girl called Liesel who is on her way to live with her new foster parents, Hans and Rosa. And it's about so many different beautiful relationships, obviously with Liesel's new foster parents and the very different relationships she has with both Hans and Rosa, as well as her close friend Rudy, and then Max, who is a Jewish man that her foster family is harboring. He's being kept hidden in the basement. And this book is written from the perspective of death, and it's just so beautifully written. It's a very unique perspective for this story, and I love how it was executed, and it's just such a beautiful and emotional and really rich character-driven story that I have read several times and probably will continue to do so for the rest of my life. After The Book Thief, I was like, okay, I'm done crying for a bit. Let me jump into something that I've heard is really cozy and comforting and will be like a really nice read that will make me happy. So I picked up A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, which is the first in a duology, a sci-fi duology, and I'd heard great things about this book from many people, but also just Becky Chambers generally. I've been wanting to try some of Becky's books for a long time, but in particular, what sold it to me was Leonie of the book Leo, who described the main character, who is a tea monk, is very like Uncle Iroh coded. I love Uncle Iroh. So I was like, say no more. I'm buying it. So then I bought it and I finally read it. And I switched from sobbing to heartwarming tears. A Psalm for the Wild Built is set on this planet where in the past, humans had created robots, as you can imagine, to perform various tasks to assist and benefit humanity. But eventually, the robots developed consciousness. They started to have their own thoughts and feelings and desires. And it got to a point where they were like, you know what? We're done with humans. We are so done. We're going to go into the wilderness and live our lives separately from you. We're just going to peacefully live amongst nature. See ya. Toodaloo. But the main character for this story is Dex, who is a tea monk and basically travels from place to place, bringing tea to people and offering them a safe, comforting and warm space for them to just relax, take a moment for themselves, maybe have someone listen to their worries, their thoughts, whatever they need. And it's just so wholesome. Dex is also a gender, by the way, so hello, yes, representation. But one day, Dex is like, you know what? I'm unsatisfied. I have never heard the chirp of crickets in nature. And they were like, I would really like to hear that. So I'm going to go travel into the wilderness and seek some crickets. And of course, along the way, they meet a robot, and the robot's name is Splendid Speckled Mosscap. The two of them travel together, and it's so wholesome. It's so beautiful. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. There's just a lot of really thoughtful, kind of philosophical and existential conversations and interactions between the two, because Mosscap has never experienced humanity before, but is so curious about humans and would love to meet them and understand them. And so the two of them along their travels are kind of teaching each other different things about humanity, about life, about nature, and it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So I devoured this in a day and immediately picked up the second book, which is A Prayer for the Crown Shy, and then also devoured that promptly. This is the final book in this little duology, and it just continues on Dex and Mosscap's adventures and travels. I still adored this book. I didn't have as much of a strong emotional reaction to it. It just didn't hit quite as hard as the first book did, but it was still just as beautiful and whimsical and cozy and wonderful, and honestly would really, really recommend you pick up this duology if you haven't yet. I think it's now out in like a bind-up edition, which is also beautiful. The Temptation. I also read Forest of Noise by Mosaba Butaha, which is a collection of poetry, and this is from a Palestinian author. And these poems are about life in Gaza, and there's a bit of a mix. Some of the poems are kind of about peacetime and the land and the earth, and then we also have poems that look at the occupation and the genocide and war. I found a lot of the poems really moving and powerful, and there was a lot of really rich and beautiful imagery. And I will admit that I'm kind of at the start of my poetry journey, and I've been really wanting to work that part of my brain because I feel like there's a lot I can take from it. So Forest of Noise was my kind of first foray back into poetry after quite some time, and I thought Forest of Noise would be a good place to start, with the themes being something that I think is super important. And I did find it accessible. It wasn't a collection of poetry that I was really struggling to like wrap my head around and make sense of, which sometimes happens. So I'm really glad that I picked this up. And if you haven't yet and would like to support Palestinian authors and poets, would recommend. The next one I am so excited to talk about. Oh my gosh. It is Theodora's Tea Shop by Christy Ann Jones. Let me set the scene for you. I work in marketing at Hachette, Australia, and every week there's like an acquisitions meeting where the publishers will bring forth books that they think Hachette should acquire and publish. I don't attend those meetings, but I do get sent the list and the manuscripts, and I was just looking through my emails one day, perusing the next acquisitions meeting agenda, when I see the name Christy Ann Jones jump out at me, and I did let out a bit of a squeal. I was so excited, and then I immediately opened up the manuscript and started reading it. If you don't know, Christy Ann Jones is an Australian YouTuber who posts a lot of bookish and writing content, and she's been vlogging and kind of chronicling the journey for writing a book and trying to get it published, and I have been following along with Project Teacup's journey for such a long time, so it was such an unexpected and exciting moment to see that manuscript in my inbox and was like, oh my gosh, I can read it. I'm going to link one of Christie's recent videos down below, which is her journey to getting Theodore's Teacup picked up by a publisher because to my utter delight, she decided to sign with us at Hachette and also Wildfire in the UK. Honestly, probably a highlight of my career. I'm so excited about this. Anyway, what this book is about. It is a like 1920s inspired fantasy following Dot, who has always dreamed of running away to learn magic. And when she hears about a woman who very well may apprentice her, she decides to take her chances and travel to the city of Aliaster in search of this woman. It's very Howl's Moving Castle-esque. I adore Howl's Moving Castle, and I loved those elements that felt very reminiscent of that, but it is of course its own unique and beautiful story. I loved the found family and the focus on friendships. It's just so rich in the atmosphere and so excited. It's coming out July 28, 2026, and I cannot wait for the day that more people can read it so I can talk to more people about it. Next up is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig, a romantic fantasy with a really unique and interesting magic system that is kind of based on tarot cards. And this is set in a kingdom where magic is feared and outlawed. And our main character, Elspeth, when she was a child, she survived an illness that left her with magical abilities, but also this spirit trapped in her head. And obviously she's trying to keep all of this on the DL, so she doesn't get persecuted for having magical abilities. And one fateful day, she comes across some highwaymen on the road and her entire life is upended, and she kind of gets thrust into this quest to help rid the land of this dark magic that has been infecting it. I really enjoyed this one. Like I said, a very unique magic system, which I really liked exploring and understanding. It's also very atmospheric, and overall, I did really enjoy this one. I am really excited to pick up the sequel and see how everything concludes. Next, I read The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. These ones are rereads, and I read them 14 years ago. Wow, it's been a long time. That said, I am very familiar with the stories, and I've rewatched the movies a bajillion times each. But I was just really excited to dive back into this series and see if it held up, but also just re-experience it as a book, because obviously when things are adapted into movies and TV shows, etc., things have to change or be left out. So I was really looking forward to going back to the original source material and then also continuing on reading the prequels. So if you're unfamiliar with the Hunger Games series, firstly, wow. But it is a YA dystopian set in North America that is now called Panem, and essentially it's divided up into the capital and 12 districts. And every year the capital demands 2 tributes from every district to be thrown into an arena and fight to the death. As to the question of whether it held up, definitely. And as many people have also said, it definitely hits in a different way reading it now, especially given a lot of what's happening in the world right now. A lot of governments are making some very interesting changes to policies and just general attitudes that feel like steps backwards, and a lot of people are very unhappy with a hell of a lot of it. It just definitely feels a little closer to home now, kind of in the current global context. But I'm so glad I reread these books. I think my ratings are similar, except I rated Mockingjay 3 stars when I first read it, but I gave it 4 stars on a reread now. I think I just appreciated it a lot more. It is very much more focused on the politics rather than the arena. The stakes are just a lot higher, and everything's happening on a bit more of a broader, larger scale, and definitely appreciated that a lot more than I did 14 years ago, apparently. An Education of Malice by S.T. Gibson, which is a sapphic, dark academia novel about vampires. I think this is a bit of a companion to A Dowry of Blood, but it doesn't follow like the same characters, and there are like hundreds of years between the 2 books. There is a little connection Easter egg between the 2, but they definitely feel like very different stories. It is set in the modern day, and we follow Laura and Camilla, who both attend St. Perpetua's College. Laura has just arrived and pretty much immediately falls into a bit of an academic rival with Camilla, and this rivalry blossoms into something a little bit more. I really liked the gothic atmosphere for this one, and it was also a really fun read. There are quite a few scenes that have really stuck in my memory, which I think says something given the fact that I do not have a very good memory, and after finishing a book I can immediately forget all the details pretty quickly. That said though, I did wish that there was a bit more meat to the story. I feel like there were really strong bones, but I would have loved for it to have been even 50 pages more, just so there was a bit more time spent fleshing out and developing certain things like some of the relationships and also the ending. The next 6 books that I read, I'm not going to go into much detail because I have an entire vlog in the works that I'm currently editing, and I want to share all the juicy details and thoughts and all that good stuff for that video. But I will briefly let you know what I did read, and there might be like a slight teaser in the best/worst books section at the end of this video. And those books are Emily Henry's adult romance books. So I read all 6 of them in publication order. Like I said, these are adult romance and they have kind of small town vibes. And there's also a running theme throughout of family or friendship as well. So alongside the main romance, there usually is another thread that focuses on other important relationships in our main characters' lives. And very, very briefly, what these books are about. Beach Read is about 2 authors who in college were like academic rivals, and they each write quite different books. One is more romance, the other literary, and they cross paths one summer and are both struggling writing their next novel, so they decide to genre swap. People we meet on vacation is like a friends to lovers situation. We have these 2 friends that used to travel together all the time, but they had a bit of a falling out, and 2 years later reconnect. Book Lovers is about 2 publishing professionals, a literary agent and an editor, who kind of butted heads over one project in the past. And our main character goes on this sister's trip to a small town, and her sister's hoping that she might meet a small town guy and fall in love and run away together. But she ends up bumping into this brooding editor, and the 2 of them can't seem to stop crossing paths. Happy Place is a second chance romance, and there's a very tight-knit friend group, and they go away every year to one of their parents' like summer houses. But the couple that have broken up haven't really told their friend group because they're worried that it might cause this group to fall apart. But I'm sure you can imagine all of the tension that happens when the 2 of them both end up going onto this friend trip once again. The funny story is about these 2 people whose now exes ran away with each other, and the 2 that are left behind and very heartbroken are roommates. And then feelings. And lastly, Great Big Beautiful Life is about 2 writers who are in a bit of a competition to secure this once in a career, once in a lifetime opportunity to write the life story of this woman who was like an heiress, a tabloid princess back in the day, and then just like disappeared from the face of the earth for decades. So those are the Emily Henry books that I read. You're just gonna have to wait until the vlog to hear more details on what I thought of all of them. I also listened to the audiobook of Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, which is his memoir talking about his childhood living and growing up in apartheid South Africa. This is a book that my friends and I read for a book club, and I'm honestly really glad that this was chosen. I thought that listening to the audiobook of this was a great way to consume Trevor's story, obviously being narrated by Trevor himself. He tells his story in the most authentic way. It was such an interesting and educational book for me. I didn't really know much about Trevor Noah before reading this, and also I admittedly didn't really know much about the apartheid in South Africa and Namibia for a good chunk of the 1900s. So overall, this was just a very eye-opening book for me to read. Trevor Noah was born kind of on the tail end of the apartheid, and he explores, you know, his childhood and growing up during apartheid, but also as a mixed race boy during a time when white people and black people were not allowed to be in a relationship and have children, and the way he had to move through the world and stay hidden because he was, like the title says, born a crime. As a comedian, I think he balanced some really hard topics, hard moments, alongside, or in some instances, Trevor told certain stories in a way that was quite comedic. The actual contrast of how he told the story and the content of that story was, I think, really well done. And like I said, would definitely recommend listening to the audiobook for this. And the last book I'm going to be talking about is Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. V.E. Schwab's latest novel, which is a sapphic vampire story. Very toxic, but we have another sapphic vampire book on the list, and I adored this. I really enjoyed this. I can definitely understand why this might not be everyone's cup of tea. It's not very plot heavy. It is predominantly very much character focused. It's about the atmosphere and the vibes, and diving really deeply into the lives of the 3 women who are the focus of this story. And it is set over a period of like 500 years, and we really explore the lives of each of these women and how their life experiences and the world shaped them into where they are when all of these threads do culminate into a bit more of a plot towards the end of the story. It's definitely a lot slower in pace, but I loved it. I feel like in terms of the work of V.E. Schwab, if you are an Addie LaRue fan, you'll probably also really like Bury Our Bones. I think the only thing of note that I had for this is that I also wish there was a little bit more time spent on the climax of the story and like maybe a smidge leading up to it. But that is all 18 books that I read this year. So with all that said, I still have so many books on my list that I need to read. But let's finish things up with the kind of nutshell of my reading of the first half of the year, the highlights but also the lowlight, the main takeaway, and if you want to only take a handful of recommendations away from this video, I will share with you my favorites of everything that I've read. So to kick things off, the best fantasy, it's a tie between Theodora's Tea Shop by Christiane Jones and Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. These ones really stood out to me. Whilst these are quite different books, there are some similar elements that I really loved in both of these. They were richly atmospheric. I really felt like I was immersed in the stories and in the worlds. And I also loved how much of a focus we have on women in very different ways. Theodora's Tea Shop, I loved exploring the female friendship. Bury Our Bones was much more toxic sapphic relationships, but there's so many complexities that feed into that. Absolutely ones I would recommend to put on your TBR or your wish list. I'm sorry you have to wait a year, but definitely standouts for fantasy for me. I loved these. Next, my favorite sci-fi was hands down A Psalm for the Wild Build by Becky Chambers. I was just blown away by just how much was crammed into this novella. It made me emotional in so many different ways, and it was really thought-provoking, and it wasn't anything too kind of revolutionary and new, but I really did love exploring a lot of these existential thoughts and ideas through the lens of Moscap, the robot who is just so curious about humanity and has so many questions and really loved to learn and understand and have these really interesting conversations with Dex. I think the fact that I instantly grabbed the second book to read it the very next day speaks volumes about how much I just fell in love with this book and honestly overall the duology. If you don't mind being spoiled a little bit for my Emily Henry vlog, my favorite romance of the year so far is Funny Story. I'm not going to share what any of the other books are, but there were a couple of other Emily Henry books that were very, very close to Funny Story, but this one did end up taking the cake for me. I really enjoyed the premise and setup for this romance where we have two people who are just heartbroken. Their partners ran away together and the situation led to them rooming together. But I also really loved their dynamic, the banter between the two, but also just like the thoughtful gestures and moments. I also loved the little plot thread of Daphne being a librarian and organizing this big community event that was so wholesome, so cute. Adored Funny Story. Really love this. As one of my focuses for the year was rereading, I thought I'd also share what my favorite reread of the year was, and that is definitely The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. This is just such a powerful and emotional story. It hits me in the guts every single time I read it, as much as I think I'm getting over it. No, I think it's fantastically written. The characterization, the way that we see these characters and the world through Death's perspective is also really interesting, particularly in some of those moments where Death interjects and shares more of their opinions and thoughts, and at the start of the story with the setup. Oh, so beautiful. So beautiful. Adore this book. Please read it if you haven't already. The last category is my least favorite book. It doesn't feel quite right to say the worst book because I didn't hate it. I didn't think it was badly written or like the story itself was a problem. It was purely a personal thing. Like it wasn't for me at this point in my life. I feel like maybe in a few years' time when I have dealt with some of my own mental health things, I will be in a better position to read this. Oh, I haven't told you what the book is yet. It is Happy Place by Emily Henry. The things that I didn't love about the characters and some of the issues with the relationship are things that hit a little too home for me in kind of an uncomfortable way. There are just some traits that I also saw in myself, which are things that I don't love about myself. And so it wasn't the most pleasant experience to be faced with that for like 350, 400 pages of a book. So essentially it just like wasn't the book for me for now. But I will talk more in depth about my thoughts in the Emily Henry vlog. And with that, I think that is all for this video. Thank you for listening and letting me talk your ear off. I would love to know about some of the best books you've read so far this year as well. Hit me up with your recommendations, please, in the comments. But otherwise, that is all that I have for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!